my comic buying doesn't normally go this far back, and in fact, it didn't go this far back on this occasion either, because this was actually a gift that my uncle gave to me once. And I've really just recently been down to my mum's house and brought it back with me because it's been sealed in a plastic bag for a number of years inside a dark drawer. But it's in remarkably nice condition. And as you can see, this is an Eagle magazine. I say magazine. It's a comic. But it's really big. To give you an idea of how big it is, if I put that on top of it, that is a Zoids comic, which is an A4 size comic. So basically you're looking at an A3 size comic. And as you can probably see already, the date on this comic is 5th of January 1951. And it's number 39. And I believe it was 4p. There. Came out every Friday. And this is a classic British comic, post-war, but it has a lot of that sort of, what's the right word to describe that sort of military heritage, I suppose, to it. It's, very, very British. Britain going out into space in the solar system with a titular character, Dan Dare, pilot of the future. Now, Dan Dare got resurrected about 30 years later to reappear in, I think it was, I was going to say it was 2000 AD. I think that's where he came back. And it was, of course, a more modern take on Dan Dare. But this is the original Dan Dare. And what I personally find really fascinating about this sort of comic is that it's very grown-up writing, It's very sophisticated. It's very factual. It's what I would call hard science fiction. It's not sort of fantasy. It's properly based on hard physical facts. And when you go back and look at Eagle as a whole, as the whole magazine, it does cutaways and there's all sorts of technical stuff being thrown at you. So it's quite it's a very intelligently put together sort of publication. It's not a light read. It's a really, really solid publication. So apparently in this issue, Dan Dare has been painted blue in order to conceal himself amongst the Atlanteans. I haven't actually read it all. I'm literally just going to flick through it as I go through with you just to sort of see what's in it. I don't even know what other strips are in it. But you can see it's beautifully illustrated. It's coloured as well, which I imagine in at that sort of time probably wasn't a cheap exercise to do. I mean, the vast majority of comics tend to be black and white, and maybe it'll only have a few strips that are coloured, would be my suspicion. But it is quintessentially a British comic, So, they're talking about constructor robots and electronic brains, and this is the 1950s, don't forget. But this was a really strong time for science fiction. Don't forget, the first atomic bombs had only been blown up 6 years prior. So that's the sort of age that people writing this stuff were living in. So, anything was seen as possible at this sort of time. So it was a very, very strong time for science fiction in general. So you can see here, obviously, we're switching into black and white on the next page. Electronic pilot and radar guide net for cavern navigation. So it's just really, really sophisticated language, and you kind of wonder who it was actually being aimed at. Was it actually intended for quite mature people to be reading, rather than just kids? Because this sort of paper, I don't know whether it would have stood up to a kid sort of trying to flick through it. It's been presented almost as a sort of newspaper size publication. So then we move on from Dan Dare. And incidentally, the reason why I'm showing a bit of interest in Dan Dare of late is that when I was looking at my sort of starfighter video, I was thinking of Dan Dare in terms of being a source for one of the earliest ideas behind starfighters, and I have found out that there was a a concept of a Treen space fighter in it. And it's very, very difficult to search against that term because it just doesn't turn anything up because this is all sort of pre-internet stuff. But it actually looks like an X-wing in some respects, but it was from the 1950s. But it looks like it was also interatmospheric, so it doesn't really qualify for my starfighter video purposes. But it is what it is. So I was right in the sense that Dan Dead did feature things that were space fighters, even if it doesn't meet my definition of starfighter as such. So here we have the Adventures of PC-49, apparently from the famous radio series by Alan Stranks, who I've never heard of, I must admit. I love the artwork on these as well, because it's, even though it's sort of 70 years old, you immediately get the idea of who these people are supposed to be even back then. But this guy looks like sort of Dick Tracy. It's sort of but I mean, it'll still be another 30 years, I believe, until this is classed as an antique comic. But whatever it is, it's old, and I'm very conscious that I'm not wearing gloves for this, and I probably should be really, but. So we've now got a long form. So this reminds me almost more of an annual, because look at this. This is a proper sort of. It looks like a serialized book. In a comic, which is crazy. That's just not a thing anymore, is it? You wouldn't see that. I never saw that in all the time I was reading comics, and I was reading comics from the sort of the early 80s. But that's a really, really interesting idea that you would actually serialize a book in a comic. Love it, for collectors only. So you've got to be a collector to read this section. Heraldry and thematic stamps. I just love this stuff. It's so British. Football hints, brilliant. It's just fascinating. It's just this little glimpse back in time of a very, very different time. Obviously, we are. I'm trying to think whether or not TV. TV was. I don't know, when did colour TV come in? I think I picked up recently in Christmas quizzes that the Queen's first televised address was in 1957. So I'm really not sure. This might have been quite a major source of a sort of common fictional characters that amongst the few that people would actually have regular access to at this point in time. So it's really interesting. Cinema would have been going by now, of course, so there is that as well. So Riders of the Range, you've got a cowboy comic strip. Not sure I like the. I don't know. I was going to say that I don't like the artwork, but actually it's kind of growing on me as I look at it. It's really interesting. Give it to him, Bob. And I see this is the sort of the world's first turboprop airliner. You get these lovely cutaways, and it's just sort of giving you really solid factual information about sort of quite technical subjects, and it's just like, again, why is this in a comic? But it's just that it's a very sort of British thing for them to do. I think personally, I just find it fascinating that you'd have this sort of level of illustration and drawing in a comic, and yet it's not fictional. This is the Vickers Viscount. I've heard of them. Shown here coming into Northolt Airport in a 40-seater operation in 1952. Oh, so this is a future, right? So this is one that's coming in. I see that. That makes sense, actually. That's why they're doing it. So see, future of the past. That's it. That was the future. That was the future in 1951. Wow. Skippy the kangaroo, apparently. Okay. With of course the required boxing gloves, because they are known for that. They actually seriously are. You've got to watch kangaroos, apparently. So Charles Bright, the first man to lay an electric cable across the Atlantic, linking England and America. So it's teaching you stuff. It's clear here. It's just fascinating. I know this had. I believe that the guy who came up with Eagle, whose name unfortunately I haven't researched, did have sort of Christian background. So I wonder if part of the ethos of the Eagle was to educate young boys as well as to entertain. I think that's probably where it's coming from. So maybe they were thinking that, if not everyone was able to go to school, or, the schools were still being rebuilt after the war, this was a way to sort of keep them interested in factual stuff. So we've got, article on hummingbirds. Eagle Club and Editors page. Competition corner. Now that's the sort of humour that I like, because it's just like very sort of clever visual humour. So cash desk, change here. So the kids come in and he's put his clothes there and he's going off in his swimming trunks and moving on. That does tickle me, because I often see when I walk past the cash machine and it says sort of free money, and I thought, oh, that'd be nice if it were actually free. But it's like, it's just like funny little turns of phrase like that do tickle me from time to time, and that's a nice visual one. So I like that. That's entertaining. The Strangest Hotel in the World by Alistair Scobie. The writer of this special article is on a big game hunting expedition with a camera! Okay. Wow. Okay. But again, this is far more like a sort of newspaper sort of article rather than a comic. There's actually much less comic-y content in here than I would ever have imagined. But I got the sense from an annual that I've just been looking at to try and look at the sort of the starfighter bit, that it was quite a serious publication in many respects. So here's how a bar of milk chocolate gets its shape. That's a grammar fail there, but anyway. Subbuteo, the game of table soccer, the replica of association football, brilliant. So Subbuteo existing even as far back as that, of course. And it's actually declaring that these were advertisers. I think we could have figured that one out, but Harris Tweed Extra Special Agent. Marvellous. Looks like he's got I was going to say he had a TARDIS then, but apparently it's just a box. Okay. Walls Ice Cream presents Tommy Walls, the Wonder Boy. How fascinating. So that's a full page spread using a comic to advertise Walls Ice Cream in 1950. Very clever. Can you imagine this today? Well done, Tommy. The whole team is in great shape for tomorrow. Thanks, sir. We all keep fit on Walls Ice Cream. You keep fit on Walls Ice Cream. I mean, seriously? I just love the fact they could actually make that sort of statement back then and not get clobbered for it. It's brilliant. That is hilarious. That is hilarious. I love that. Wow, I'm smiling quite at the small print as well. And then finally, The Great Adventurer, whoever that is. Philippi, 1900 years ago. So at the back, they're doing like a historical comic. A little bit of bludgeoning there. Paul and Silence. Oh, nice. What shall we do with them? Beat them up or slit their throats? That's delightful. Well. It's really fascinating. I've only got two others. So I've actually sort of unsealed the oldest example that I've got. I don't know if there's any real value to these as sort of collector's pieces. For me, it's more a sort of intellectual interest in them, I suppose, in the sense that, they're a really interesting capture of comics from 70 years ago in a completely different format to what we're used to seeing them in today. And yet they've got ideas behind them that we would not be surprised by today, and in fact which we're still seeing today, but just more sort of sophisticated versions of them. So very little has really changed in the intervening years. It's just that this one has this really sort of strong British approach to life kind of running through it, which obviously you wouldn't get from an American comic of this era. So it is a unique capture of British culture of that particular time, aimed at a relatively young audience as well, which is just fascinating, I think, personally. So I'd be interested to see if anyone. I mean, I don't think anyone watching my videos is going to remember this from their childhood, because you'd have to be incredibly old now to actually remember these from growing up. But you might remember the later modern versions. And there was also a version of Dan Dare that appeared in a comic called Revolver. And Revolver, I believe, was a sort of 2000 AD sort of Fleetway kind of comic. And I remember that had quite an elderly Dan Dare in it. I'm not quite sure what it would have been doing with the character, but probably something quite subversive, I suspect, given that it was kind of late 80s, early 90s maybe when that came out. I don't think it lasted very long, but I remember it being a very colourful magazine, very colourful comic. And I think it was quite experimental, which is probably why it didn't last very long. But I do remember that Dan Dare was in that, ironically in his own future, as the pilot of the future. So I hope that's been an interesting look through for you, and I dare say you can sort of pause it in places if it's of interest. And I wouldn't propose to do any more of these, particularly unless you're particularly interested. But as I say, I've only got a couple others that I could look at if you were interested. But you'll have to let me know in the comments if you are. All right. Thanks for that. Cheers for now.